Story 1. I worked as a mall Santa in high school and likely experienced every crazy story you could imagine. But one, in particular, stands out most vividly in my mind. A young boy waited quietly with his mother in line until it was his turn to sit in my lap and have his picture taken. As his mother started to follow him up towards my chair, he turned around and yelled, "No, Mom, you have to stay back there." I watched the mom look at him pleadingly, and she reluctantly agreed to keep her distance. As I tried to make sense of the situation, I invited him up to my chair. He looked to be 8 or 9, which was older than most, Oscar 75% of the kids in line. When I got around to asking him what he wanted for Christmas, his eyes locked onto mine, and it happened. If you're real, then aren't you supposed to know? As I fumbled around with my words, it dawned on me. Here he was, on the cusp of becoming a non-believer, and his plan was to make sure his mother couldn't whisper to me the gift he had been hoping for. I tried to play it cool and come up with an explanation on the fly when suddenly the mother dropped her bags and started jumping, punching, and kicking the air, furiously. Shoppers stopped dead in their tracks. Staring at her, we were at the main intersection of a 2-story indoor mall. I said something along the lines of, "Well, you can't expect me to bring you those Power Rangers if you aren't a good boy, and listen to your mother." He melted instantly. His eyes grew wide and his jaw dropped. Before I could react, he buried his head into my foam-padded chest and gave me the best hug all Christmas season. The mother couldn't believe it herself and tried to gather herself as her overjoyed son turned to run and explain to her how Santa really is real and that he had proven it at least for another year. Worth it. Story 2. I wasn't a Santa, but I helped organize a Christmas party for special needs children for 3 years running as part of a charity group. The guy we picked to be Santa was this really well-built, tall, skinhead guy from Kent called Paul. He was a really nice chap, though. Popular with the ladies, the gift of the gab, and a Cockney accent. So he stood out a lot in Belfast, where he lived. Anyway, he was picked to be the Santa for the party. He had his doubts, but we were convinced his well-built frame and height would be convincing. All we had to do was give him a bit of a belly and a costume, and he put on this deep, booming voice that completely masked the Cockney. The day of the party went really well. We had jugglers, magicians, a mini disco, games, food, and of course, a Santa's grotto. We had the Santa's sack prop against a false wall, which had a hole in it that would let us plant toys in the sack without any of the children seeing it. As it was all special needs, schools we had their names, and a teacher hid behind the wall and identified the child coming in. We had handpicked each toy to the child, depending on their disability or special need, reached that toy into the sack, and whispered the name to Paul, Santa, via an in-ear headphone we had hidden on him under the hair and beard. That way, when the child entered, he could seem all-knowing, and the children were in amazement at this. It added to the magic. Anyway, to the point. One child came in who was around 7 or 8, but his disability made him very small in stature, so he looked about 4 years old, and he had an oxygen tube under his nose. He also had poor eyesight, and his glasses gave him these giant, sad-looking eyes that melted everyone's heart. He came into the grotto. Santa. "Why, hello, Patrick. Nice to see you again." His eyes lit up and he exclaimed, "Patrick, you know my name? You're the real one?" Santa. "Indeed I am. I came here to make sure you are being a good boy. Have you decided what you want for Christmas?" Patrick. "Yes, but it's not a present. I just want to be at home this year for Christmas." I am not afraid to admit that my eyes grew very damp. The girls who volunteered that year immediately broke down, but Paul held it together remarkably well. He explained that he couldn't get in the way of doctors and that they knew best, and he wanted Patrick to be better so he could visit him on Christmas Eve no matter where he was. Paul then reached into the bag and lifted out a cuddly toy duck. The child ran around with that duck the rest of the day tucked into his jumper. Stroking its head and kissing it now and again, he beamed a massive smile for the rest of the day. Paul, a 6'2" muscle-bound skinhead, East Ender from London, was found crying in the charity office when he left to get changed. Story 3. I never played Santa, but I have always had this one memory of Santa from when I was 7. For about a year, there was this small, frail boy in my school. When you're young, you don't always understand the suffering of others. But I did know that Fred came to school every day in the same shorts, his hair a mess, and the kids liked to make fun of him. I thought he was so cool though. He had moved so many places, like me, and would tell me amazing stories about meeting sultans and the Queen of England, and how his dad was off on some quest to bring something home. As Christmas came near, I asked Fred what his family was doing. He said something about his dad off on a quest again, and that gremlins had stolen their Christmas decorations. I remember walking home, he looked so sad. He said, "Santa can't always find us because we move around a lot." The next day, my family went to see Santa. I sat down on his knee, and when he asked me what I wanted, I pulled out a Terry's chocolate orange and a few Christmas tree balls from my backpack. I told him, "My friend Fred said you couldn't find him sometimes, and something stole his decorations. Can you give this to him?" What I didn't know, until later when my mother told me, was that Fred's father had taken the role of mall Santa to make some extra money. I remember Santa starting to cry. At first, he wouldn't take what I was trying to give, but my mom came and talked to Santa. He came over to me and hugged me, telling me, "No gift I can give is as good as the gift of a true friend. I will make sure he gets these." I was so ecstatic when Fred came to school after break with my Christmas ball attached to his backpack, like a bauble. He excitedly told me that Santa came. My mother, later on, told me the truth of the situation. In hindsight, I hope he is that happy every Christmas. Story 4. A few years back, I filled in for Santa at a locally owned toy store, as I don't quite look old enough to be Santa, and I have a full, lush, gingery lumberjack beard. I was billed as Nick Jr. And the story was that my dad was Santa, and I was in training to be the next Santa. He was having me go and fill in for him at some of the usual stops as part of my training and getting to talk to the little kids. Oh man, the kids loved that. There was a rocking chair that I was supposed to sit in, but I sat on the floor with the kids and chatted, and it was friggin' awesome. The kids really connected with this idea of a trainee Santa. The most heart-wrenching story was a little girl, about 7 or so, who was staying with her dad and stepmom because her mommy was deathly ill in the hospital. She came and saw me every day that I was there, and she just wanted to talk to someone she knew could really understand where she was coming from, in her fear. She hoped that she could come to visit the North Pole, but understood if it wasn't possible. On my last day of the gig, she brought me a handwritten in crayon note, thanking me for everything, saying she was glad to have met me and hoping that I grew up to be the best Santa ever. Let me tell you, all the feels. I am going to keep that damn note forever. Story 5. It was Christmas Eve 2004, and the father of a family with little kids who were losing their belief in Santa decided to rent a suit, climb up on the roof, make a bunch of noise, and have jingle bells jingling so the kids will hear, run outside, and see Santa with their own eyes. We had a busy day on the engine, firefighter, including a child airlifted to the hospital from a really bad MVA, a house fire that destroyed a house, and then this call. Well, Santa was on the roof, making noise, kids ran outside, 6, 8, 11, and Santa was lying on the ground. The family calls 911, and we show up. Santa is having aggressive respirations, and his heart is in V-fib. We ended up doing CPR on him, including airway and multiple shocks, all in front of his family. We tried several times to remove the family to protect them, but they wouldn't listen. Tears, I can't ever remove the vision from my mind of the children's faces as they saw Santa being worked, then realizing Santa was their dad. Then their dad had died. Story 6. I have been doing the Santa for a few years now and work at a tree farm with a cabin in it. The most heart-wrenching story I have is not mine, but from the other Santa that I work with. There was an older woman, mid-20s, who was mentally handicapped, and when she sat on this Santa's lap, she got really quiet. And it took him asking her what she wanted for Christmas several times before she spoke up. She said, "Santa, my mommy is dying, and I need one more year with mommy, Santa. Please give mommy one more year." Before he could say anything, she threw her arms around him and gave him a hug while she started crying. Her caretaker, possibly father, then led her away. The next Christmas, she came back to the farm and was very excited to see Santa. You see, her mother had lived for another year, and she sat on Santa's knee and asked Santa for another year, that she knew and believed in him, and that she had been very good the whole year through. She had been careful to be good and came to Santa again because she wanted her mommy to live for another year, just like last year. "Santa, just one more year, please, Santa. Just one more year." Again, before he could say anything, she was giving him a near strangling hug and then was led away by her caretaker. The next year she was back, but she was obviously very upset. She sat again on Santa's knee and looked at him and started to sob. She said she knew Santa had tried his hardest, that he did the best he could, and that she should have asked for 10 years the first time instead of just the one. She apologized for being so angry at Santa for letting her mommy die. This Santa looked at her and gave her a long hug, and he said to her, "My child, your mommy has passed away, but she will live forever in your heart as long as you remember her." She got really quiet and stopped crying and looked at him. She whispered to him, "I love you, Mommy. I love you, Santa." She hugged him very tightly and then was led away by her caretaker. She has not been back since, but my co-Santa said to me that it was moments and people like her that made being Santa so important to him and why he will never quit. Story 7. I used to be a big sister for the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, and around the holidays, they ask all the volunteers to pitch in to throw several free holiday parties for the kids. Somehow, I ended up being Santa at one of these shindigs, despite the fact that I was 1. A woman, 2. Blonde, 17 years old, 4.55, and normal weight. You get the idea. I was a shitty Santa, but basically all we had. A ton of big sibs and little sibs showed up at this thing, and by the 80th kid on my lap, I had fallen into a steady rhythm. Say some Christmassy stuff, tease the kid about being nice, not naughty, get the present request, take a picture, and whisper the present request to Big Sib so Christmas miracles really would happen that year. That is until this little boy with the biggest brown eyes in the world sat on my lap and whispered in my ear, "Santa, just tell Daddy we all miss him, but I'm being a brave boy and taking care of Mommy, like he said." I was stunned. I sat there speechless until he said, "Mommy told me even you can't bring him back, but tell him I love him, Santa." And he patted my pillow belly and hopped down. I wish I could say I did something heroic or life-altering for this kid, but the truth is, I had no idea what to say to make that better. No promises of trucks or footballs were going to make him feel better. Thinking about it still gives me chills. Story 8. I was an elementary school Santa for 3 years. This experience still haunts me. I'd had a long morning of little tykes with retail advertising dreams of all kinds of shiny new must-have toys, older boys with dreams of motorized vehicles, and older girls with dreams of cute boys and makeup and clothes. After a break to feed the reindeer, those costumes are hot, I returned to a busy classroom filled with kids working at all the activities and having fun. And then, after another hour of the usual, I met 2 little children dressed in their Sunday best, and each of them perched on my knee, looked deep into my eyes, and asked, quietly and from the depths of their hearts, "Please, Santa, I don't want any toys. I don't want anything. I just want my baby sister to get better." And suddenly, I knew who they were. Their little sister, age 7, was dying of cancer in the local children's hospital. We had already done a school fundraiser for her and her family. Our scout troop had raked leaves at their house and helped them with their Thanksgiving dinner. It took everything I had to not weep. I hugged each child close in turn, gave them their candy cane, and told them that it wasn't up to Santa, but I would do my best to put in a good word with the guy upstairs, and told them to remember that everybody loved them too, and that it was okay to have fun for themselves, and that I would do what I could to make sure they had some presents. They each smiled a little bit in turn and went to hug each other and their grandmother. I could see the smile through the pain in her eyes, and she led them to other activities. I called a break to check on Rudolph on the roof and walked as rapidly as I could to the teacher's lounge, where I wept quietly for the little girl and her family and the unselfish love of little children. And then put on the suit and went back to work with a broken heart. She died 2 days after Christmas. We planted a butterfly garden at the school in her name, just outside the office window. It's a pretty place, with a shaded bench and brilliant flowers. And the butterflies come there in the summer and dance. Story 9. My ex-girlfriend's company did a Christmas party for child cancer patients at a prominent NYC cancer hospital every year. I went to volunteer, and they asked me to dress as Santa and walk around handing out candy canes and other little toys. Well, one kid who was about 4 had scars like crazy all around his head. He motioned for me to bend down and whispered to me, "All I want for Xmas is to be able to see you again next Xmas." Jesus Christ, the tears just started pouring out. His parents told me he had brain cancer and has had over 15 operations through his short life. Well, I made little man my helper that day. I carried him on my shoulders the rest of the day while crying most of the day, and he helped me hand out candy canes and presents all day. I even took a break and ran to a nearby Toys R Us and got him a huge Rudolph stuffed animal and went to a makeup place nearby and had them make a red circle on his chest with permanent makeup. I went into costume and told him Rudolph dropped this off for him and kissed his chest with his nose. The smile that came across his face is something I will never forget. His parents came up to me at the end, crying their eyes out, saying this was the happiest they had seen him in over a year. We broke up shortly after, and IDK, if he made it to the next Xmas. All I know is it took a ton of coke and liquor that night to numb the sadness of that day. Since then, I've gone through some shit and came over to Kilidaji myself a few times, but thinking of that kid has stopped me. I figured if he went through all that in 4 short years, any problem I have pales in comparison. Story 10. I was deaf Santa for a local church. I'm skinny as hell, so it looked ridiculous. Punk-ass hearing brother of one of the kids nearly ruined it, but I refused to let him. The kids were cute and sweet, and I wish I stuck with ASL and didn't have all these piercings so I could do this again. I wasn't a mall Santa, but in my junior year of HS, my ASL 3rd, my class was the first one to start the program. There were no higher classes. Teacher asked my friend if one of us would be willing to be deaf Santa for a group of children at a nearby church. He couldn't, but I said I would. I'm pretty tall and weighed around 150 lbs, so I looked ridiculous, stuffing the suit with pillows to look as close to Santa as possible. Seriously, look at this. So disproportionate. So I could sign pretty well, though my comprehension was pretty slow. Whatever though, I worked through it. I didn't have to do much. Kids came up and sat on my lap. I asked them what their name was, if they'd been good, the works. Then one of the adults would hand me the child's gift. I'd give it to them, quick picture, and move on. Those kids were probably the nicest I've ever seen. No one complained or threw a fit. They were all just happy to have a Santa who they could talk to and who could talk to them. Fuck, I almost cried just sitting there with them. I really wish I stuck to ASL. 3 years later, I don't remember much at all of the language. There was this one little shit, though. He was the brother of one of the kids, and halfway through, he decided to call out, "Hey, Santa!" Being someone who could hear, I instinctively looked up. Little fucker started going around making a huge deal that Santa's not really deaf, he's fake, blah, blah, blah. That freaked me out a bit, so I had to quickly tell the kids that no, I wasn't deaf. But I had learned sign language because how else was I supposed to know who they were and what they wanted, or if they'd been naughty or nice, if I couldn't talk with them? That shut the kid up, but I still felt pretty bad for fucking up my whole deaf Santa character. All in all, the event went well, and that's still one of the most memorable nights of my life.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video, also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.